Starving polar bear strays into town, determined man rushes to its rescue. A small, snow-laden town on the edge of the world stirs as dawn breaks, casting soft hues of violet over the endless winter sky. The chilled wind whistles through empty streets, carrying with it the scent of the ice-bound wilderness. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the outskirts, a ragged polar bear, thin to the bone and on the verge of collapse. Locals gasp in alarm and curiosity. Among them stands a determined man whose heart clenches with empathy at the tragic sight. Unbeknownst to anyone, their brief, fateful encounter will spark a powerful bond and a quest to save both bear and man from the darkness within. Churchill, Manitoba, often called the polar bear capital of the world, sits along the frosty coast of Hudson Bay. From a distance, it appears to be just a row of humble buildings lining a wind-swept stretch of tundra. But this tiny outpost hums with life, shaped by an environment as harsh as it is hauntingly beautiful. Ice floes drift across the bay with a lazy grace, and crisp Arctic winds slice through the air. Winters here last forever, some would say, though the brief summer sun can blaze with surprising intensity. In Churchill, people have a certain understanding with the wild. They respect it, fear it, and embrace it in equal measure. Samuel Fletcher was not a native of this region, though it had been his home for the last 5 years. An environmental researcher by trade, Sam found his calling here after a painful divorce, a life transition that left him in need of a fresh start. With deep fascination for the Arctic ecosystem, he accepted a position with a research station to study the patterns of polar bear migration and the impact of climate change on their hunting habits. Each day, Sam ventured onto the tundra with a battered snowmobile, scanning the horizon for signs of bear tracks. His meticulous logs fed into broader databases that tracked polar bear populations across northern Canada. Lately, his notes were worrying hungry polar bears were roaming closer to town earlier each year. Thinning sea ice meant fewer hunting opportunities, and the polar bears, once the masters of the frozen sea, were struggling. Sam had come to love these majestic creatures for their quiet strength, their uncanny intelligence, and the grace with which they moved across the ice. In the still, quiet days of winter, the snow muffled nearly every sound except the wind's mournful wail. On such a morning, Sam stood on the outskirts of town, scanning the horizon through his binoculars. Little did he know, fate was about to bring him face to face with one of the most pivotal moments of his life, a moment that would test his courage, compassion, and willingness to risk everything for a dying polar bear. The first sign was the footprints. Impossibly large paw prints crept across the freshly fallen snow, leading closer to the town's edge than Sam had ever seen before. The toes splayed wide, indicating the bear had been searching for secure footing in the powdery drifts. Melted ice crystals around each print suggested it had lingered, sniffing and investigating. Sam's heart quickened. Polar bears in Churchill were not uncommon, but a bear venturing straight into the populated area was alarming. Usually, conservation officers and warnings kept the animals at bay. Something was different. This time, desperation had broken the uneasy truce between town and tundra. He hopped onto his snowmobile and followed the tracks with cautious excitement. Sam felt a surge of responsibility. This was not his first close encounter, but something told him it would be the most significant. The footprints wound between snow-laden shrubs, weaving through the frozen outskirts. On the horizon, low-hanging clouds and a distant haze of blowing snow made for ominous shadows. The footprints grew more erratic, like the bear itself had become disoriented. When Sam finally spotted the creature, a wave of sadness washed over him. The polar bear stood in the midst of a deserted parking lot behind an old diner, its fur ruffled and dirty, bones visible beneath taut skin. Even from a distance, Sam could see the hollowness in the bear's eyes. It looked starved, far from its usual regal presence. A swirl of wind kicked up snow around it, and the bear stumbled, nearly collapsing under its own weight. A handful of townsfolk had gathered at a safe distance, unsure what to do. Some murmured in hushed tones about calling the conservation authorities. Others snapped pictures from behind car doors. But Sam felt paralyzed by the misery etched in every line of the bear's gaunt frame. This was more than just hunger. It was hopelessness. In that instant, Sam resolved to do whatever he could to help. Some might have called it foolish or dangerous, but for Sam, who had spent years observing and admiring these animals, allowing this polar bear to wither away without aid felt like a betrayal of the Arctic itself. The arrival of a weakened polar bear in the heart of Churchill triggered an immediate wave of alarm. Children peered through frosty windows, parents pressed them back from the glass. The local police station received a dozen calls within minutes. Tour operators, who usually guided visitors on controlled polar bear sightseeing tours, worried about an attack or a public relations nightmare. Rumors swirled that the bear might be rabid, that it might be violent, or that it was only the first of many in an unprecedented migration of starving animals. Sam approached on foot, as the hum of the snowmobile engine could startle the bear. Though the adrenaline pulsed through his veins, he moved slowly. If the bear grew agitated, it could lash out. The reality of a 600-pound predator, though this one looked closer to half that weight from starvation, reminded Sam to maintain a healthy distance. He was not alone for long. A few residents joined him, including a local wildlife officer named Martine Evans. Martine, tall and broad-shouldered, had the authoritative calm of someone who had spent her life in precarious situations. She waved Sam over to stand beside a pickup truck, where a radio fizzled with static. They exchanged urgent glances as they considered their options. Churchill had a polar bear holding facility often referred to by tourists as the polar bear jail, used to temporarily house bears that wandered too close to town. Typically, officials tranquilized the animals and relocated them once the ice was stable enough for proper hunting. However, the process was dangerous, especially for a bear already in poor health. The stress could be lethal. While Martine argued for caution, Sam felt a tug of empathy so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. The idea of shooting this creature with a tranquilizer dart, caging it, and leaving it to languish behind steel walls while it starved even further, filled him with dread. He wanted to try something else, something more compassionate. But how to convince Martine and the rest of the authorities remained uncertain. The bear sniffed the air, licked at the crystalline snow, and collapsed on its side. It looked too weak to stand any longer, every breath labored. Sam swallowed hard, tears threatening to form in his eyes. The starkness of its suffering was devastating. He could feel the eyes of the townspeople upon him. This was a place where humans and polar bears had learned to coexist with a fragile respect. Could there be a path that would spare this starving giant while protecting everyone else? Every fiber of Sam's being insisted that he help the bear feed it, protect it, nurse it back to strength. Yet the rules were strict. Feeding polar bears within town limits was heavily discouraged, if not outright illegal in most contexts, because it could disrupt their natural hunting instincts and draw them closer to human settlements. Martine reminded him of these regulations as she radioed the provincial wildlife authorities. "Sam," she said quietly, keeping her voice steady, "we can't just start handing out snacks to a polar bear. It's not how the ecosystem works. We need to follow procedure." Sam clenched his jaw, gazing at the motionless bear lying in the parking lot. "I know, but look at it. By the time procedure takes effect, that poor creature could be dead. Martine gave a weary sigh. She was no stranger to the heartbreak of polar bears in decline. Climate change had made her job increasingly complicated. Bears were forced to wander further for food as the sea ice formed later and melted sooner. We can try sedation and move it to the holding facility. We can call in the vet. If it's healthy enough, we might release it when the ice thickens. But if it's too weak, her words trailed off. They both knew what that meant. Sam's heart twisted painfully. Just then, the bear let out a low, feeble groan, a sound that sent chills through the onlookers. It was as if the creature were pleading for a chance to live. Sam inhaled a shaky breath and looked around. Neighbors and friends huddled in groups, uncertain. Despite the tensions, there was a tangible wave of empathy from those who had come to watch. The environment here might be rugged, but compassion ran strong in Churchill. "Let's at least get it warm, safe and under watch," Sam urged, quietly but intensely. "We can figure out the next step from there. Maybe there's a way to get it stabilized without shocking its system." Martine hesitated, then nodded. "I'll talk to the vet. We'll see if we can rig something up without causing too much chaos." They were about to orchestrate one of the more unusual rescues Churchill had seen, caring for a starving polar bear that had all but collapsed among them. Time was of the essence, and every second that ticked by felt like a countdown to tragedy. Yet beneath Sam's swirling anxiety, an ember of hope flickered. Perhaps this might be the moment where human compassion and the natural world could converge in a way that changed both forever. It took some quick thinking and collaboration to set the rescue plan in motion. Martine arranged for a large horse trailer-like transport used previously for moving sedated animals. The local veterinarian, Dr. Aaron McKinley, arrived with a tranquilizer gun specially calibrated for polar bears. He explained how the dosage would be critical. Too little, and the bear might not be fully sedated. Too much, and it could slip into a fatal coma. Balancing the needs of a starving animal made the process even riskier. Meanwhile, Sam and a few volunteers hastily cleared out a makeshift enclosure in the back of the town's wildlife observation facility. Normally, it was used for short-term care of smaller creatures, foxes, injured caribou calves, or the occasional lost husky, but never a polar bear. It might not be perfect, but it was the safest, warmest place available on short notice, and it was near the vet's clinic. With the sedation equipment ready, Sam guided Dr. McKinley to a vantage point. The bear still lay near the diner's parking lot, breathing shallowly and occasionally lifting its head to sniff the air. Its coat was dirty, patches of fur matted with ice. Sam's heart hammered as Dr. McKinley took aim, adjusting for wind. A soft pop echoed, and the tranquilizer dart found its mark in the bear's shoulder. The animal flinched, confused, and tried to scramble to its feet. A wave of fear rippled through the crowd, but the bear's strength faltered. Within minutes, it slumped over, sedated but alive. The rush to move the bear began. People with ropes and tarps approached cautiously. Sam held his breath, terrified that at any moment the tranquilizer might fail or the bear might slip away. But the ragged rise and fall of its ribs continued. It took nearly a dozen people to carefully hoist the limp, massive body into the trailer. Sam positioned himself at the bear's head, one hand resting gingerly on the thick fur. He whispered softly, though the words were lost in the flurry of activity around him. "A silent vow, I won't give up on you." Once the bear was secured, the convoy set off for the wildlife facility. Sirens weren't used, no sense agitating the animal unnecessarily. Inside the trailer, Sam knelt next to the immobilized bear, listening to each labored breath. Every exhalation was an unspoken plea, "Please, don't let me die." Sam felt tears threaten again, but he blinked them away, focusing on the task at hand. He believed it wholeheartedly. The survival of this magnificent beast mattered. More than that, it symbolized a deeper connection we share with nature. Saving it was, in some small way, saving a piece of ourselves. When they reached the wildlife observation facility, everyone moved with quiet urgency. They had prepped a large pen in what was affectionately called the barn, though it was more of a steel-sided structure attached to a small laboratory. Heat lamps were rigged above sturdy wooden stalls once used for caribou. Fresh straw lined the floor to provide insulation, though it was hardly the polar bear's natural environment. Dr. McKinley's medical station was set up on a metal table stacked with supplies, the fourth fluids, sedatives, antibiotics. He even had a supply of specialized carnivore feed, though they'd have to be extremely cautious about how much the bear was given at once. As the team unloaded the bear, the overhead lights illuminated every detail of its deteriorated condition. The hollows around its eyes were dark, and its backbone protruded alarmingly beneath what should have been a thick layer of blubber. The once lustrous fur was dull and caked with dirt. A hush fell as Sam and Dr. McKinley knelt to examine the beast. They inserted and the fourth line, began administering hydration, and checked its vitals. Outside, a crowd gathered, even in the biting cold, awaiting news. Sam could hear muffled voices in the hallway, half relieved, half anxious. A few children peered in through the glass windows, wide-eyed with a mixture of curiosity and concern. For many in Churchill, polar bears were part of the local law-powerful predators, often admired from a distance. To see one like this, close to death, triggered emotions that ranged from heartbreak to a fierce desire to protect. Martine stayed near the barn's entrance, exchanging updates with wildlife officials in Winnipeg. Bureaucracy churned. In the background, permits for short-term captivity, decisions about sedation schedules, ethical debates on whether interventions like this helped or harmed the broader bear population. Sam overheard snippets of conversation. Some argued the bear's plight was natural selection in action. Others believed human-caused climate change obligated them to intervene. To Sam, it wasn't a matter of politics or policy. A life hung in the balance. For hours, they worked in shifts, monitoring the bear's temperature and heartbeat. The sedation gradually wore off, replaced by a fitful semi-consciousness. Every so often, the bear would stir, letting out a weak moan. The second Dr. McKinley deemed it safe. Sam administered a tiny amount of a high-calorie nutrient mix. They had to be careful. Reintroducing food too quickly to a starved body could lead to organ failure. Beneath the halogen glow, Sam stroked the bear's grimy fur, whispering words he wasn't sure the animal could understand, or even hear. Yet, he offered them anyway. "I'm here. We're all here." Deep down, a fragile hope blossomed. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull the bear back from the brink. That night, Sam lay awake on a cot in the corner of the barn, refusing to leave the bear's side. The howling wind outside rattled the building's metal walls, a constant reminder of the Arctic's relentless dominion over this land. In the dim lamplight, Sam's thoughts wandered back to the crumbling pieces of his old life. Before Churchill, he had been a rising star in an environmental consultancy in Toronto, busy, ambitious, and in love with a woman he believed would be his partner forever. The day she handed him divorce papers was the day he realized how detached from real human connection he'd become. His work consumed him, and he had neglected the relationships that gave life meaning. Seeking solace, he accepted the research position in Churchill, hoping the icy landscape would shock his system into feeling something again. In many ways, it had succeeded. He found comfort in the tundra's raw, unforgiving beauty, and in the silent camaraderie of the polar bears he studied. There was a purity in their eyes, unburdened by the petty concerns of human society. Something about that primal connection reminded him of who he once was and who he could still be. Now, as the polar bear stirred restlessly under sedation, Sam felt a powerful empathy. Both of them, in their own ways, had been left starving, one for physical sustenance, the other for emotional wholeness. The bear's vulnerability pulled at Sam's heart. He realized that in saving this bear, he might be saving himself, or at least discovering a path toward personal redemption. In the dark, he thought of his father, a man who taught him to respect nature. They'd camped in the Canadian Rockies when Sam was just a boy, and his father would speak reverently about ecosystems in balance. When one piece suffers, he had said, everything else does too. It was a lesson Sam had carried subconsciously. As he drifted toward a fitful sleep, he thought he saw his father's encouraging smile, as if to say, keep going, son. Do what's right. At dawn, the bear's condition remained precarious. Yet there was a subtle change. Its breathing had steadied, and when Sam offered a small portion of nutrient-rich soup, like mix from a ladle, the bear managed to lick it from the rim. It was a delicate dance, balancing the crucial refeeding process and the risk of overstressing its organs. Dr. McKinley monitored the bear's heart rate, noting the slow improvements. Still, it was far from safe. Any setback, a spike in body temperature, an infection, or an internal issue could be fatal. Nevertheless, Sam felt something akin to joy flicker inside him. That small movement, the simple act of the bear licking nourishment, was a victory. He stepped outside the barn to share the update with the small crowd that had gathered, many with steaming mugs of coffee or tea in hand. He spotted familiar faces from around town, the grocer who kept his shelves stocked through the harsh winters, the elderly teacher who rarely missed a sunrise, and the local postmaster who handled the steady stream of mail with unflappable patience. They're calling it a miracle, Martine said quietly. Sidling up to Sam, she nodded toward the barn. But we have a long way to go. Sam blew out a breath that condensed into a cloud of vapor. I know, but this is the first step. Just then, a local reporter approached, camera in hand. The story of the starving bear's rescue had spread, and people were eager for updates. Sam, unused to the spotlight, felt awkward. He stumbled through words of caution. The bear was not out of danger, and interventions with wild animals should be considered case by case. The last thing he wanted was for Churchill to become a free-for-all of well-intentioned tourists, bringing food to every bear they encountered. Still, as he fielded questions, Sam felt a sense of community. People wanted to help. Some offered donations for veterinary supplies. Others offered to take shifts so the medical team could rest. The polar bear had inadvertently unified the town, reminding them of the delicate bond they shared with their wild neighbors. A quiet, collective vow formed among them. If there was any way to save the bear, they would do it together. Over the next several days, the bear's condition oscillated between slight improvements and frightening regressions. One afternoon, it developed a high fever, which spiked dangerously before Dr. McKinley managed to bring it down with antibiotics and careful cooling. Another time, it refused to eat for nearly a full day, sending the entire team into a spiral of worry. Through it all, Sam stayed, sleeping in short bursts on the cot, waking to check on the bear's vital signs or to lend a steady hand. The barn was filled with the hum of machinery, space heaters, medical monitors, the occasional clank of a generator. Outside, winter raged on. The sun provided little warmth, rising late and setting early. The darkness almost felt eternal. Yet inside that humble structure, a fragile sense of hope glowed. Each morning, Sam prayed the bear would still be breathing. Each evening, he watched with bated breath as Dr. McKinley administered fresh the fourth fluids. For Sam, these were days of reflection. Between medical checks, he scribbled notes in his journal. At times, his entries were purely clinical, documenting the bear's responses to treatment, the dosages, and dietary changes. But more often than not, his thoughts drifted into a realm far more personal. He wrote about how compassion was not a weakness, but a bridge to understanding. He wrote about how the fate of one polar bear could galvanize a town to remember the power of communal care. In quieter moments, the bear would open its eyes clouded, perhaps fearful, and lock onto Sam's gaze. Whether it recognized him or not was debatable. But Sam felt a strange sense of communion in that look, as if the bear was acknowledging his presence, if not his intent. Whenever those moments occurred, Sam found a renewed surge of determination. No amount of exhaustion could deter him from this mission. He remembered feeling so numb when he first arrived in Churchill. Now every emotion coursed through him: fear, hope, desperation, resolve. It was a whirlwind, but he wouldn't trade it for anything. Across Churchill, the polar bear's struggle became a symbol of resilience. The local diner offered free meals to volunteers who spent long hours at the barn. High school students, though they couldn't enter the facility, formed a support group collecting blankets and supplies. A nearby hotel manager let Dr. McKinley and his team shower in the guest rooms for free, knowing they barely had time to go home. Even the mayor stopped by, quietly offering any resources the local government could provide. Word spread beyond Churchill, attracting media attention from larger outlets in Winnipeg and even national Canadian networks. Some conservation groups lauded the rescue, while others expressed concern about human interference in a wild animal's life. Through it all, Sam maintained his stance. This wasn't about setting a broad precedent. It was about extending compassion to an individual creature in crisis, while also studying the deeper issues like why the bear was forced to come so close to town in the first place. One snowy afternoon, Sam stepped outside for a breather. He marveled at the surge of people braving sub-zero temperatures, a testament to the collective empathy ignited by the bear's plight. Old arguments about polar bear danger gave way to an acceptance that something extraordinary was happening, a man and a bear forging an unlikely bond. Children asked questions about the environment, the thinning ice, and what they could do to help. Sam found himself, unexpectedly, cast in the role of an educator, speaking in simple but earnest terms about global warming, melting ice, and the precarious future for Arctic wildlife. Within this flurry of attention, Sam felt a profound sense of connection. Each handshake, each word of encouragement, each shared mug of hot chocolate carried more than just kindness. It carried a collective will to make a difference. Some might call it naive idealism, but Sam believed it was the fundamental spark that led humanity to accomplish great feats. And if saving one polar bear could inspire greater awareness and compassion, then maybe, just maybe, this rescue was part of something much bigger than a single life. After nearly 10 days of intensive care, the bear's eyes were brighter. Though it still rested heavily on its belly, ribs visible, it had managed to consume increasingly larger portions of a specially formulated diet. The fever subsided, and the cuts on its paws, likely from wandering over sharp ice, were healing under daily antiseptic treatments. Dr. McKinley, while cautious, admitted that the bear's vitals were stabilizing. Sam permitted himself a moment to celebrate. He approached the stall, carefully avoiding sudden movements, and watched as the bear raised its massive head. There was a flicker in those dark eyes, something that might have been recognition. For a moment, Sam recalled a line he once read about polar bears being among the most intelligent of bear species, known for their curiosity and problem-solving skills. He wondered if somewhere, deep in that majestic creature's mind, it understood they were trying to help. A small chuff emanated from the bear's throat, neither a growl nor a purr, but something in between. "That's a good sign," Dr. McKinley remarked, his face brightening. "It's acknowledging you, or at least not threatening to bite your head off." Sam chuckled, relief washing over him. "That's definitely progress." Martine, leaning against the stall door, offered a rare smile. She had been juggling tasks, from calming the public's fear to ensuring the rescue conformed to wildlife regulations. Now she allowed herself the luxury of hope. "So, what next?" she asked, crossing her arms over her parka. Sam took a deep breath. "We keep this up. Feed it carefully. Keep monitoring vitals. Once it's strong enough to stand and move on its own, maybe we start planning for a release." Martine nodded. "The ice on the bay is getting thicker. If all goes well, we might be able to move it in a few weeks." The prospect of a successful release tugged at Sam's heart. He pictured the bear lumbering across the frozen expanse, returning to its rightful domain, a domain that was shrinking more each year. He silently pledged that when the time came, he'd do everything he could to ensure that the bear's second chance counted. Not everyone was convinced that rescuing the polar bear was the right move. Some locals feared other bears would follow suit, wandering into town looking for human assistance. Bloggers from distant corners of the internet questioned why resources were being spent on a single animal when countless others faced starvation. "Nature has its own order," they wrote. "We shouldn't interfere with survival of the fittest." Pundits debated it on talk radio, some praising the rescue as a story of compassion, others condemning it as a misguided emotional response. The criticism weighed on Sam. He understood the argument's wild ecosystems are fragile, and well-intentioned meddling can have unintended consequences. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he felt certain they had done the right thing. The bear had stumbled, quite literally, into their lives. Ignoring it would have meant watching it die in front of them. Could they, in good conscience, have done nothing? Churchill was a place of contradictions. People lived in constant vigilance against polar bears for safety reasons, yet the entire tourism industry also thrived on the allure of these majestic predators. Sam saw a bigger picture. The polar bear's predicament was a symptom of a planet in flux. In saving this one bear, they were shedding light on the broader crisis. If that sparked even a sliver of awareness or a shift in perspectives, it justified the effort. That night, while the town was quiet, Sam found himself alone in the barn. He leaned against the stall door, observing the bear dozing. A single overhead lamp cast a warm glow on the sleeping giant. Sam whispered into the hush, "You matter, we matter, and I won't let them say you weren't worth it." In the stillness, the bear exhaled, a soft snort that sounded almost like an answer. By the 2-week mark, the transformation was remarkable. Though still far from robust, the bear had gained a small layer of weight, enough that its bones no longer seemed ready to burst through its skin. Its fur began to take on a slight sheen, and it even managed to stand for short periods, albeit wobbly. The exhausted, defeated look that once haunted its eyes had softened, replaced with glimmers of its natural curiosity. Dr. McKinley performed a series of blood tests. The results showed improvement in white blood cell counts and overall organ function. There was a collective sigh of relief among the volunteers and townspeople. They were winning this battle, one day at a time. For Sam, witnessing the bear regain its strength felt like watching a friend recover from a grave illness. He marveled at the resilience embedded in nature's design, given half a chance and the right care. Life had an uncanny way of fighting back. Yet as the bear's condition improved, a new question rose to prominence: when and how to release it. "Another week or two," Dr. McKinley estimated, flipping through his notes. "If the weather remains stable and the bay ice continues to firm up, we can probably orchestrate a release. But we'll need to minimize stress. This bear has been through enough trauma. Sam nodded. He was both excited and terrified by the thought of letting the bear go. Excited because this was the ultimate goal, to return the bear to the wild. Terrified because out there, the world was harsh, and the environmental challenges that led it into town still loomed. There was no guarantee the bear would survive. But, Sam reasoned, at least it would have a fighting chance, a far better chance than it had when it first staggered into Churchill on death's door. Martine, always pragmatic, cautioned them to keep a close eye on the weather. Sudden shifts could crack the ice or blow in a vicious storm, complicating any release attempt. Still, the plan took shape. A low-stress transport to the ice's edge, a monitored release, and hopefully the bear would resume its natural hunting patterns. If it manages to catch a seal or two before the spring melt, it should rebuild its fat reserves, Martine said, sounding guardedly optimistic. Sam clenched his fists at the thought of that moment, the bear stepping out onto the ice, the Arctic wind ruffling its fur, freedom beckoning. It almost felt like a dream. But before that day came, there was still more to do. Another round of medical tests, careful monitoring of its diet, ensuring it could walk steadily and maintain a stable body temperature. Each step felt monumental, each small gain a testament to resilience. As preparations for the release intensified, Sam found his sleep plagued by nightmares. In one dream, the ice cracked beneath the bear's paws, plunging it into frigid waters while he stood helpless on the shore. In another, the bear roared at him, accusing him of meddling in something he couldn't understand. Each time, Sam woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. He confided in Martine after one particularly harsh night. They stood near the barn entrance, the hush of dawn broken only by the wind. "I can't stop wondering if I'm doing the right thing," he admitted. "If saving this bear only leads to a more painful end later." Martine placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We never have absolute control over outcomes," she said, "but we do have control over our actions. We did what we believed was right, what compassion and decency demand. That's all anyone can do." Her words struck a chord. Sam thought back to the collapse of his marriage, the mistakes he had made by trying to control every outcome. In the aftermath, he'd learned the hard way that life was messy and unpredictable, that sometimes all you could do was your best with the information you had. Now, with the polar bear, he was reminded again that no amount of planning guaranteed success. But at least, by trying, they had given the bear a chance it never would have had alone. That understanding lifted a weight from his chest. Life, whether human or animal, was defined by struggle and uncertainty. But within that uncertainty lay the potential for triumphs, large or small, that defined one's character. A flurry of final arrangements marked the next week. The ice on Hudson Bay was deemed stable enough in a region about an hour's drive north of Churchill, accessible by an ice road. Martine coordinated with a small team of wildlife officers to stake out a suitable release site far from any immediate human habitation, but close enough that the bear wouldn't be entirely isolated in case something went wrong. Dr. McKinley secured sedation equipment for a final dose, not powerful enough to knock the bear unconscious, but enough to keep it calm during transport. Food supplies, emergency medical kits, and tranquilizer rifles were all loaded onto trucks. The plan was to leave at dawn, travel with the bear in a secure cage, and release it onto the ice if its vitals remained stable. The night before the release, Sam found himself alone with the bear again. This time, the bear was awake, standing on shaky legs, but standing nonetheless. Its gaze followed Sam's movements, eerily calm. Sam breathed in the animal's scent, a mix of straw, antiseptic, and underlying musk of raw wilderness. He approached, careful not to cross the barrier. "Tomorrow," he said softly, voice echoing in the quiet barn, "you'll be free, back where you belong." He hesitated, feeling foolish for speaking so earnestly to a creature that might not understand. Yet the bear watched him, blinking slowly. "I don't know if you'll remember any of this," he continued, emotion thick in his voice. "But I hope you'll remember that not all humans are bad. Some of us still care." The bear offered a faint huff, perhaps sensing Sam's sincere tone, if not the words themselves. For a brief moment, Sam felt the lines between species blur, as though a shared understanding of life's fragility bound them together. Morning broke over Churchill like a whispered promise, pink and gold light spilling across the horizon, illuminating the snowy roads and the convoy of vehicles assembled outside the barn. Sam and Martine led the way in a truck with a reinforced trailer that carried the polar bear. Inside, Dr. McKinley monitored the bear's sedation. They had chosen the dosage carefully, wanting it docile enough to travel safely, but alert enough upon release to navigate the ice. The drive was tense, though the scenery was breathtaking. Endless stretches of white tundra opened up around them, the sky so vast it seemed to dwarf everything else. Sam's heart pounded with anticipation. This was it, the culmination of 2 weeks of tireless work, sleepless nights, and unwavering commitment. When they reached the designated spot, they parked in a wide semicircle on the ice. A few wildlife officers disembarked, scanning the horizon with binoculars. The air was sharp and cold, with a wind that rattled gear and whistled through the truck doors. Sam hopped out, carefully making his way to the trailer. He peered inside, finding the bear lying calmly, sedated yet aware. "Ready," Dr. McKinley said, with a nod to Sam and Martine. The officers set up a ramp leading from the trailer to the ice. Slowly, with the hush of collective breath, they lowered the gate. Sam felt his lungs tighten as the bear blinked at the sudden brightness. For a moment, the world stood still. Then, with a cautious groan, the polar bear rose. The sedation made its movements sluggish, but the bear managed to lumber forward. When its front paws touched the ice, a shiver seemed to run through its body. More steps, a few stumbles, and then it stood fully on the open expanse. A gust of wind rippled through the bear's fur, as though nature itself welcomed its wayward child home. For a few seconds, the bear seemed disoriented, scanning the white world around it. Sam remained nearby, wanting to step forward but knowing he had to keep his distance. He silently begged the bear to stay upright, to find strength in the cold that had once nearly claimed its life. Then the bear lifted its head, sniffing the frigid air. It ambled a few steps farther from the trailer, pausing to gain its balance. Each movement was tentative, but there was a spark of will behind it. This was the Arctic, its true home, beckoning. The team watched, holding back tears and cheers alike, letting the bear have its moment of quiet majesty. After nearly 5 minutes, the bear turned once more, gazing at the humans who had cared for it. Sam stood transfixed. Could it be recognition, gratitude, or simply instinctive caution? He would never know for sure. With another shuddering exhalation, the bear continued onward, gradually moving across the ice until it was just a speck in the distance. Eventually, the horizon swallowed it whole, leaving only the memory of its presence and the faint tracks in the snow. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind howled, and tears slipped down Sam's cheeks. He didn't care who saw. Finally, Martine laid a comforting hand on his arm. "You did it," she whispered. We all did. The drive back to Churchill felt surreal. Without the bear in the trailer, the emptiness seemed immense, yet the mood among the convoy was one of quiet elation. They had given the bear a second chance, a fighting chance. Sam stared out the window, eyes drifting to the endless plains. He felt a mixture of triumph, sadness, and unexpected longing. In part, he missed the bear's presence already. Over those weeks, An invisible bond had formed a bond rooted in compassion, desperation, and the unspoken understanding that life was worth fighting for. Now that the mission was over, he had to let it go. Back in town, people waited anxiously for news. When Sam and the others shared that the release had gone smoothly, a small cheer went up. Some folks clapped each other on the back, and others simply sighed with relief. The day became a spontaneous celebration of community spirit. The local diner offered discounted meals, and an impromptu gathering formed in front of the tiny town hall. Children jumped around excitedly, mimicking polar bear movements, while elders nodded gravely, perhaps recalling the days when polar bears were more numerous on the ice. Sam slipped away from the crowds. He felt both grateful and overwhelmed, longing for a quiet moment to process everything. Walking through the familiar streets, he noted how this place had changed him in ways he never anticipated. When he first arrived, he'd been running from heartbreak, from the emptiness of a life that no longer felt meaningful. Now, he felt renewed, grounded in purpose, and in the knowledge that caring for something beyond himself could heal wounds he never knew how to mend. He paused by the shore, where the waters of Hudson Bay lapped sluggishly against the rocky beach. The ice extended outward, merging with the horizon. Somewhere out there, a polar bear he had come to know, if only briefly, was learning to survive again. Sam inhaled the freezing air and closed his eyes, silently wishing the bear well. In doing so, he felt an inexplicable warmth in his chest, as though part of him too had been set free. In the weeks following the bear's release, Sam's life settled into a new routine. He returned to his research duties, documenting polar bear sightings, analyzing the data on sea ice conditions, and assisting scientists who arrived in Churchill to study the shifting Arctic environment. However, the rescue had left a deep imprint on his heart and mind. He found himself increasingly involved in community outreach, speaking at school assemblies and hosting informal talks at the local visitor center. People were eager to learn about the complexities of polar bear conservation and how climate change affected their survival. Sam often shared the story of the starving bear without glorifying it, but also without underplaying the dire situation that forced it into town. In doing so, he inspired discussions about personal responsibility, environmental stewardship, and the power of collective empathy. Letters and emails came in from all over the world. Some criticized him for interfering with nature, but many more applauded the compassion that had united a small town at the edge of the world. Sam responded kindly where he could, explaining that the rescue was an extraordinary situation, not a blanket template for how to handle wildlife conflicts. But he admitted, privately, that every time he saw a photograph of the bear, safe in the barn or roaming free on the ice, his conviction only grew that they had done the right thing. Each time Sam gazed across the tundra, he wondered where the bear had gone. Had it ventured north to follow the seal migration routes? Was it standing on some fractured shelf of ice, scanning for its next meal? Perhaps it had traveled far along the coast, reacquainting itself with old hunting grounds. Whatever its journey, he hoped it was forging a path to survival. Reflecting on the rescue, Sam recognized that he, too, was on a path to recovery. The heartbreak and guilt that once weighed him down felt lighter now. Saving the polar bear had awakened him to the simple truth that real connection and compassion, be it for a human or an animal, could revive the most dormant parts of oneself. By pouring his energy into saving a life, he found he had rediscovered the capacity to truly care. He began writing more journal entries, articles, even the beginnings of a short book about the rescue, tentatively titled On Thin Ice, A Town, a Bear, and the Power of Compassion. The pages delved not only into the scientific aspects, but also the emotional journey that everyone in Churchill had experienced. His words touched on how community and empathy could overcome fear and bureaucracy, reminding readers that hope was not just a lofty idea, but a tangible force. Late one evening, as a brittle wind rattled his small cabin's windows, Sam gathered up the courage to check on his old life in Toronto. He flipped through emails, messages from former friends and colleagues. Many had heard about the rescue, offering congratulations. One message stood out, from his ex-wife, Lisa. It was a short note. She admitted she'd seen the story on the news, wrote that she was proud of him, and that she was sorry for the way things ended. Sam stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a complex swirl of emotions: sadness, acceptance, maybe even gratitude. The break had been painful, but it had led him here, to a place where he could grow into a more authentic, empathetic version of himself. He typed a reply, brief yet heartfelt, thanking her and wishing her well. It felt like a final step in letting go of the past, clearing space for whatever lay ahead. Winter gradually gave way to the fleeting Arctic spring, where the sun lingered longer in the sky each day. Meltwater trickled over the frozen ground, and bits of lichen poked through the snow, hints of life emerging from dormancy. The polar bears typically migrated further north or east by this time, following the receding ice. Tourists came in smaller numbers, and Churchill returned to its quieter rhythm. On a balmy spring morning by Churchill standards, at least Sam joined a small expedition to survey a stretch of coastline. They spotted a couple of polar bears from a distance, healthy, lumbering figures moving across a thinning ice shelf. Sam's heart leapt when he raised his binoculars to watch them. Could one of these be the bear he had helped rescue? It was almost impossible to tell, yet the idea of it stirred a swell of pride. Sometimes he felt the ghost of the bear's presence at his side, a reminder of the fragility and beauty of life in the north. Each time Sam recalled the hollow look in the bear's eyes when it was near death, he also remembered how it came alive again under their care. That memory was a guidepost, now evidence that even in a world grappling with grave challenges, empathy and determination could carve out moments of grace. In a final gesture of gratitude, Sam wrote a letter to the people of Churchill, thanking them for rallying around the bear's rescue. He pinned it to the local bulletin board in the diner, where people gathered for their morning coffee. In it, he expressed how the rescue was not his doing alone. It was a community effort, fueled by the kindness and generosity of neighbors who refused to stand by while a living creature suffered. He also acknowledged the complicated reality of human-wildlife coexistence, urging everyone to remain vigilant and respectful of the natural world that shaped their community. The letter sparked warm conversations among the locals. Some recalled how uncertain they had felt when the bear first appeared. Others admitted they had doubted the rescue's feasibility. Yet here they were, months later, having witnessed a near miraculous recovery. No one knew precisely where the bear was now, but they cherished the idea that it roamed free, embodying their town's resilience and compassion. For Sam, life continued with its rhythms of research, introspection, and occasional phone calls from journalists, eager for updates. The rescue had changed him in ways big and small. He found himself more open to forming deeper connections with people. He volunteered for local events, joined Martine and her family for weekend potlucks, and even started planning a modest wildlife photography exhibit to highlight the Arctic's breathtaking beauty. In all these endeavors, he carried the memory of a starving polar bear who had once looked at him with hollow, pleading eyes. Whenever he felt doubt or despair, he reminded himself of that moment when the bear found the strength to stand, to walk, to embrace life again, even in a world that hadn't been kind. And Sam knew with unshakable certainty that as long as there were those willing to step forward despite fear, despite criticism, to show kindness where it was needed, hope would endure. With that final image etched in our minds of a majestic polar bear trotting across the icy horizon, reclaiming its birthright, we close our story. In a land as harsh and unforgiving as the Arctic, hope can seem elusive. Yet time and again, compassion finds a way. Through one man's unwavering determination and the unity of an entire town, a single life was saved. And in that act, hearts were awakened to the profound connection between humanity and the wild. Thank you for journeying with us through the freezing winds of Churchill and into the warmth of human kindness. If this story has stirred your spirit, please help it reach others. Like this video, share it with your community, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue exploring tales of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable bond that links us all. Your support keeps hope alive. Together, we make a difference.